You know, I've been thinking a lot lately since I watched Eric and Brandon's video about with my trivia on the Road Warriors, and I got to thinking about, they were talking about, the booking back in the day and stuff, and one thing that I think's been missing is I feel like every week is an important week in a show. I mean, I used to watch WWF Championship Wrestling every Saturday, and during, in between matches and stuff, you would have advertisements for the upcoming house shows, especially for Indianapolis at the old Market Square Arena. And, it was like those shows were always used to build for those house shows. You didn't have the pay-per-view every single month to where it seems like, it was just watered down to you were seeing the same thing day after day, week after week. And it was, the house shows meant something. And rarely, it didn't happen often, but if you were lucky, you might actually get to see like a title change at a house show. Again, it didn't happen very often, but it was still, something special when it did happen. And, I also used to watch Memphis Wrestling when I first discovered it in 1986. And one thing that always made their shows exciting was, and I'm not saying every show was a winner. I mean, every show has its stinker. And still, it was important to watch each week because with it being, a small promotion and stuff, they weren't building for a pay-per-view. They weren't building for, this big, gigantic monthly show or anything. They were building for the upcoming house show because that's what they lived off of. The weekly house show circuit. They'd have, I believe it was Monday nights was the Mid-South Coliseum. Tuesday nights was the Louisville Gardens. Wednesday would be the Evansville Coliseum. Occasionally they travel down to Arkansas or to Mississippi. They made their living off the crowds at the arenas. The TV show was always used to get you set up for those, to build the matches, to build that interest. And it wasn't just Memphis Wrestling that did that. I've always highly recommended to the guys that they need to watch some of these old shows. And I'm not just talking Memphis. They need to look up stuff like I've never really gotten to see much of. Remember Southwest Championship Wrestling? I've always heard great things about. That was a promotion, I believe, that was ran by Joe Blanchard, the father of Four Horsemen, Tully Blanchard. You got, other places like Continental Wrestling that was ran by the Fullers. You had Championship Wrestling from Florida that was ran by Eddie Graham and featured guys like Dusty Rhodes and Tommy Rich. And, I'll even say, go so far as to say, look up some Smoky Mountain Wrestling. I never got to watch much of them. You can see a few shows on I was going to say WWE Network, but of course now it's Peacock. I would love to see, the people that book wrestling today go back and watch some of those shows and take some notes. I think Tony told me one time that old Jim Cornette talked about a Memphis show. Show is actually one of the first ones I saw. It was from early March of 1986, and it featured an 18-year-old Jeff Jarrett being a referee and getting attacked by Bill Dundee and Buddy Landell after a match, and it set up this big return for Jerry Lawler. And I'm not going to go too much into the story because I want people to, look it up, look up the history of that, and see why this was such a big show, why it's considered one of the best booked wrestling shows ever, and why it's praised by, wrestling reviewers and critics. And I would also highly recommend, I've sent videos to the guys of one of my favorite angles ever, and it's the 1989 Memphis Wrestling Jerry Lawler heel turn. It was a slow burn heel turn, and I considered it to be a masterpiece, in my opinion. The guys have been challenging me to come up with these trivia questions and stuff, and they talked about how they might one day review some old school wrestling if the time permits. I challenged them to, if they still had the video links, if they need it again, I can always find it on YouTube for them. I challenged them to watch those and have a discussion about what they thought about the Jerry Lawler 1989 heel turn, the build to it, and the eventual payoff to where he finally, after I think it was at the time he had been a babyface, the hero of the territory for somewhere to like 10 years, and just to all of a sudden become a heel in his home, not just his own promotion, but his hometown. Jerry Lawler, in my opinion, this should have been the heel Jerry Lawler that should have went into the WWF in 1992-93 and feuded with Bret Hart. If this would have been the Jerry Lawler that they had, instead of turning him into somewhat of a quasi-comedy character, I think they could have done some great business with him, and that's just my opinion. I admit maybe I'm a little biased towards Jerry Lawler because he's an all-time favorite of mine, but I truly believe that Jerry the King Lawler would have been money as a main event heel against a champion Bret Hart. But again, that's just my opinion. But I challenge the guys to watch those videos again and kind of give their take, their critique of it. I would love to hear it. And again, I encourage everybody to look up, not just that, but look up some of the old territories and educate yourselves on the history of wrestling and see what made it, the golden age in a way. A lot of people want to think the golden age was back in the 50s and 60s, and I'm not knocking those time periods. They were definitely great for their time. For me, watching in the 80s was a great time for me. One of my favorite shows ever was, in fact, WrestleMania 3, even though, yes, it was main evented by that guy I don't like, but I give credit where credit is due. There was no other main event there could have been that night. Although Randy Savage and Ricky Steamboat clearly stole the show and was the best match on the card, and really the thing that I remember the most. And there's another one that I would highly recommend if you ever want to see how a feud is built and then paid off in a big way. Look up the Randy Savage Ricky Steamboat feud of 86-87. That was, a thing of beauty. Ricky Steamboat, I don't think gets the credit that he truly deserves in the business for being one of the all-time greatest workers. I think he would have made a great long-term champion, maybe in the NWA. I know he did have a run as NWA World Champion in 89 for a couple months. And, if you love classic wrestling, great scientific wrestling, you need to look up the trilogy of Ric Flair and Ricky Steamboat from 1989. And while you're at it, if you're going to stay on an 89 kick in the NWA, check out Ric Flair versus Terry Funk. That feud. That feud was, a great feud as well. I didn't get to watch a lot of NWA back in those days. Thank you, I will say, to WWE for having that video library and being able to give me the opportunity to watch those matches and appreciate the masterpieces that they were. And I know what you're thinking. Here's this guy rambling on about old school again, and is he ever going to get to a point? Well, sometimes your ramblings don't need a point. You just need to ramble on and hope somebody's listening to you and doesn't tell you to shut up. But I'm sure somebody is telling me to shut up, so maybe I better just do that. But hey, don't forget my challenge, guys. Watch that Jerry Lawler 1989 heel turn again. Tell me what you think. And if there's anybody that's actually booking in WWE, and for what the hell, if there's anybody booking in AEW that's watching this, you know, I recommend you watch it too. And I'm not knocking AEW because, you know, I think, you know, they're still young. They're doing some good things. You know, I still think they got a lot to learn. You know, I pray to God they don't turn into the new age WCW where they just start signing up all this talent and it winds up, instead of being, you know, a blessing like it usually does in the beginning, it turns out being a curse like it wound up being in the end for WCW. And if I'm going to give AEW one more piece of advice, and that is, don't sign every single WWE cast-off or WWE guy that was there for a long time that suddenly decides to jump over to you and push them to the moon over your homegrown talent. You know, you've got some great homegrown talent. Keep pushing them. Keep using them the right way. Except for the Young Bucks. I don't like the Young Bucks. I never will like the Young Bucks. You know, as far as I'm concerned, they can take their super kick party or somewhere else and just super kick themselves right on out of the business. They are turning the channel heat for me. Sorry, that's just the way I feel. Anyway, I'm going to get off here. I'm heading home with some dinner from Red Lobster for the family. We're celebrating my wife's birthday a day late because she had to work, unfortunately, on her birthday. So we're going to have ourselves some good seafood and get those kids to sleep. And maybe I can, before I fall asleep, watch maybe a little bit of NXT, since this will probably be the last NXT that before we get the Nickelodeon logo. So anyway, you guys take care, and I'll talk to you again very soon.